So that's what I'm doing now.
And for the actual people that are suffering and that have found incredible relief using cannabis, is there what is it in the name of medicine? I mean, as what you suggest as a doctor, in the situation.
Well, look, if people ask me, then I say, by all means, try it. I'm not actually in practice anymore, so I don't prescribe it. And if I did, I certainly wouldn't admit it in public, because I could get struck off the roll, believe it or not. I mean, I got struck off the roll 2 years ago because they messed up my annual registration. So imagine what they do if I said I was prescribing cannabis. Anyway, I paid them, but they didn't notice. Anyway, it's difficult for people. The thing about, the irony about cannabis is that people are taking it all the time in open. I mean, you've got Mario Ambrosini got up, you've got Robin Stranson-Ford, who's been quite public about his prostate cancer. He's obviously very active in the medical innovation bill. These guys are never raided. They've got cannabis oil all the time. Are they ever raided? I mean, that's the absurdity. You get... anyway, I'm not going to go into all that. We all know how absurd that is. But, people, if they're desperate, they've just got to get hold of the whatever form they want, the oil. I didn't mention that in the talk. And, there are people who are making it, who can advise them. You can go online. There's a lot of information out there. And they just have to treat themselves. And there are a lot of people, there are a lot of doctors who know patients are taking it. When I first came across, Werner introduced me to the whole... the cannabis, the people in Canada, the Dachau couple and everyone else, and it was a quick learning curve for me. And there was someone who's supplying cannabis oil to people, to patients who were desperate. And we wanted to try and get I certainly wanted to try and get a register of people who were taking it, what they were taking it for my own use. And just to say, look, these are how people are getting better. And I wanted all the documentation. I wanted all their diagnoses, and I wanted all their lab tests and everything. So I could say, go to my colleagues and say, look, I've got X number of patients with cancer of the bowel who've now got nothing, and they took cannabis oil. And these, I was doing it through people who were supplying the oil to these patients. And they said, no, I've got a patient here who was treated with this condition and they're 100% better. And then I said, okay, well, I had a standard letter that I wanted to interview them. I'd keep it confidential, blah, blah. And then she would get permission for me to phone them. And then I phoned them up. And it turned out often the condition I was told they cured of was not that condition. It was something much more minor. It was different. So there was this stuff going on out there where people said something or they were misheard. I don't know what. So I never went to interview them. The whole thing, I scrapped it because every time I phoned them, I got a completely different story. And that's a problem, when people are sick. I'm not saying they told the wrong story, but somehow it got mixed up. And then, of course, people didn't want me to come and interview them and get all the information. They didn't want to give me, even though I'm a registered doctor, they didn't want to give me all their stuff. And they made excuses, etc. So it was a very difficult situation. So I thought that would be very valuable. And inter alia, I came across doctors, surgeons who treated these people. And they were quite impressed, but not impressed enough to take it further. So unfortunately, that came to an end. Maybe I can resurrect it, I don't know. Any more questions?
I just want to know, as a doctor, your views on using cannabis oil as a complementary treatment with chemo for, say, breast cancer. I know it's not been proven and there's no studies.
Well, exactly.
Instead of not using chemo and only cannabis oil as a complementary treatment to boost the immune system.
Yeah, well, there seems to be. Look, if one looks at these papers where they've done the laboratory work with cannabis and at cancer cells, if I had cancer, I would definitely take it.
But would you do chemo as well?
It would depend how effective the chemo was. The problem with chemo is in general, and No, a lot of the top. There's quite an outspoken oncologist from Joburg, and it's Dr. Moodley, and he's gone on record. I've seen him been on TV. I think he was part of that series on that they did on, and was it ETV, where they interviewed Jeremy and a lot of the guys. And I think one of them, they interviewed him, and his comment was, where chemo's not very useful, he would encourage it. Where chemo is, like with certain types of lymphomas, Hodgkin's, those things, where you've got a very high percentage of cure rate, literally cure, he would discourage it. So basically, it's, as I said, when the medical innovation bill, they're going to take the people that nothing works and they're going to try them with cannabis. They won't use it. So me personally, if I suddenly had lymphoma and it was a curable one, I would take both, definitely. The cannabis, obviously it helps with the side effects of chemo anyway. But it's difficult until you're in that situation. And then often you change your mind a bit, because if someone says your hair's going to fall out and you're going to feel terrible for months, you're going to puke every time you have it, and in the end you know that you're going to be better, to me, I would rather take that. Yeah. But in terms of telling a patient what to do, you can just say, well, here's some evidence. And the thing is, you don't have to, when you take cannabis, treating it for anything, you don't have to get high on it, which is something I missed out in my talk. THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, is cannabinol, is when it's in the plant, it's in the form of an acid, THCA. And THC you cannot get high on. It's absorbed by your body, and then it has whatever effects. I'm not sure if it has exactly the same effects as THC. It seems to be very similar. But what happens is, as soon as the plant starts drying, or you heat it up, so you smoke it, or you make a tea, or you extract the oil, the THCA is changed to THC, and that is the psychotropic. That affects your brain. Okay, so there's a doctor, I think he's a Canadian or American, he's moved to Belgium or somewhere, where he treats people with juiced cannabis. Because you can take as much cannabis like juicing lettuce. You will not get high on fresh cannabis, including the resin, because it's THCA. And THC is the only psychotropic compound in cannabis. So, you don't have to have all that stuff if you've got conditions and you want to take higher dosages. You can juice the plant, but then of course it's easier to get caught because you need a lot of it when you're back home.
But the actual oil has got THC in it, the medicinal oil.
The oil's got THC. Yeah, the oil's extremely concentrated. Because it's
And how much would you take of it?
Well, it varies. I mean, the recommendation is the standard there is to take a little the size of a rice grain or a match head or something.
Okay.
But then again, you see, with the different varieties, you're getting different levels of THC. And it's trial and error again. So if someone comes to me, you ask me that question as a patient, and I say, take it. The only thing we can do is say, take the smallest amount possible, and then increase it. So you don't, you're just going to get a hell of a high if you take too much. It won't do you any harm.
A little bit once a day, or
well, it
how
depends.
many times a day?
It depends. People say different things. I don't want to go into the details because nobody can prove it once, twice, three. Preferably take it 3 times a day, especially if you're quite seriously ill. And then if you've got pain and everything, the THC will actually make it easier for you. But then you've got to be careful you're not taking a sleeping pill or something that's going to interact. There are all these basic...
What about its use as in neurologic pain?
Yeah, that's one... Yeah, well, I'm not sure if I mentioned that. Maybe I missed it out. Certainly neuralgic pain is one of the things they're using, testing Sativex out, that extra, the tincture. And that's, they found that because the reason they test cannabis for these conditions is that because of anecdotal historical evidence.
I've been smoking weed for 8 years. I didn't last the drug. Like so much on the toothpaste paper up there in twisted oil.
Yeah.
Not pleasant. We've done anything that cures the pain in 3 months or back on.
Well, there you are. It's interesting. Your Guillain-Barré is a paralysis, type of paralysis. I reckon it's caused by a virus, and it can be associated with a lot of pain. Not everyone gets it. It can kill you, but it usually just can paralyze your whole body. Anyway, that's what that gentleman's talking about. The neurological, I mean, when you think of it, THC is a psychotropic drug. It crosses the blood-brain barrier. It gets to the brain very easily. You've got these receptors on the neurons, which I mentioned. So it should have a lot of potential for neurological diseases, neuropathic pain, neuralgias, those sort of things. And that's where it comes from, you know. And, you know, the research that's been done, which is, although it's fairly minimal, it's all based on anecdotal evidence, which any herb that's been researched by big pharma comes from traditional uses. That's why they go and they test this out. I'll give you an example, a really good example. There's a type of euphorbia, which is a genus of plants. You get these big cactus and that type of thing in South Africa. There's a type of euphorbia called petit spurge, which is based in Europe and North Africa, and that was used for years for treating skin cancer, non-melanoma skin cancer. Put it on, and it caused a big blister, and it's gone. And it was registered for the first time in the States. One of the big pharmaceutical companies took all this evidence. They found the active ingredient, and now they manufacture a cream, which I think if you had to buy it now, it would be about 5,000 rand. Tube. Okay, because they've got a monopoly. Petit spurge grows in Cape Town. I read this article about this new drug, and then I saw where it came from. I discovered some just outside my house, and I've got bad sun damage. In my day, we didn't wear hats up there as kids, and the stuff works just as well. And so, you know, the difference between that tube and the plant is not very big in terms of its effects. So it's the same with cannabis. A lot of drugs are all based on plants. And the pity about cannabis is we've had these regulations which have stopped the research. You know, they can research all these other plants, but not cannabis, because they've got these ridiculous laws. That's it.
It seems to me you're doing fantastic work to work towards the legalization. But should we not try and get people to get their house in order and actually, you know, from the other side of the tunnel, to actually go into standardizing and making a product that we can say, yeah, this is, because nobody seems to know any sort of dosage. Our daughter-in-law in England thought she was on a dosage. The guy selling it to her there was giving her half dose. She came here, she got some here. She reacted like she did get higher because she thought that she was getting the same stuff. Meanwhile, she took the same dosage. You know, there's no standardization. Should we not try and get people who are growing it and manufacturing it to get their own house in order and say, we're going to clean up the act, we're going to standardize it, so we can go and as a doctor you can say, they've done the groundwork, and if we take 5 mil or whatever it is, then that equals to that. You know what I mean? We don't have to wait till it legalizes, or do we have to?
Did everyone hear that? Okay, it's just a question of standardization. Shouldn't we now, at this minute, try and get the people who grow it and manufacture it, say the oil, to standardize the levels of THC and CBD? You know, there are some of the guys who make the oil are actually getting it tested. So you can get certain from certain of the suppliers, but the thing is you can't publicize it because he's doing it illegally. And I can't prescribe it because I'm going to get struck off the register and or go to jail.
So how do you get this information?
Madam, what you've pointed out is the big problem with the laws. That's what you've pointed out.
Yeah.
That's why I'm trying to get the laws changed and not going into this medical. Because that, you know, worse things happen to people. They go to jail for 20 years, you know, and then you've got these people dying because they're taking the wrong doses and all that sort of thing. So, you know, you brought up a valid point, but there's nothing we can do about it except for these guys who are making it, who really are trying to do great work, and they're getting it tested.
And how do we find these people that are having
that's another story.
Anybody know?
The other people here will... Yeah, I think we'll have to have a register.
Yeah.
Okay, time out.
And then the next thing, can I make a comment? Cannabis is so benign.
that you can take large amounts. And just as you might treat soil in order to grow a plant, we don't say we need so many phosphates in the soil for this plant to grow, so much nitrogen. We put it all in, and the plant takes what it needs. And its growth is determined by that which was the least. Now, in giving medicine, cannabis as medicine, I think that the need to standardize and ensure that so much percentage of THCA or whatever is in this plant and in this medication, I think we can also possibly apply the approach where if you've got a serious disease like cancer, you consume as much as you can of what you can get. And that might sound extremely unscientific, but we don't know whether it's only the THC that's doing the job, or is it a synergy between the THC and the CBD, or is it a synergy between all of the cannabinoids? There's a cannabinoid in Dacha, indigenous cannabis, called cannabivaline, which in the movie What If Cannabis Cured Cancer suggests that that's very good for leukemia. So we use what you can get, and you make the best that you can, and you use it yourself. And I don't want to ever have to pay for this from a doctor or a pharmacist. That's the profession has become more and more controlling and elitist over our DIY rights to health. And in the old days, you used to have a herb garden, and your grandmother's recipe was what cured you. And so, for me, medical rights is about saying, I claim my right to grow my cannabis in my backyard and make my own oil in my own kitchen and use it in my own way according to what my situation is. And then also exercise my right to compassion, to gift it to others. And so that it can operate in a community like that, rather than this entire thing being handed over to big pharmacists, and when actually health is something you take into your own hands, with responsibility and knowledge. Obviously, something like opium or morphine, it's going to kill you if you don't know what you're doing. I've lost friends to heroin. But with cannabis, I think that the toxicity or non-toxicity of cannabis means that we can create a people's medicine without big pharma being involved at all. If they want to give it out at the hospitals, the state hospitals, there may be some form of packaging and standardization required, but it could also be, here's your parcel, go and do it. Okay.
Okay, under somebody's chair is a sticker that says to local liar. If it's under your chair, this glass bottle.
Oh, let it be under my chair. No.